Have you ever had a day when you felt like somebody had let the air out of your tires? Well, we've all been there. You felt depressed, a little deflated, just like your tires, and certainly despondent. You didn't want to have anybody around. You felt like you didn't want to talk to anybody. Let me read you something, and then tell me if this is how you felt. He went into the desert for a whole day's journey, and he came to a lone barren bush, a juniper tree, and he collapsed in its shade. And then he wanted, in the worst way, to be done with it all. He just wanted to die. Exhausted, he fell asleep under that barren bush. When you have collapsed, you felt exhausted, you know there has to be something wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. You've got feelings, you've got emotions. You just fall asleep. The one that I'm talking about here, his name is Elijah. He's been our study the last few classes. And now we find him in the 19th chapter of 1 Kings, verse 4. He's still God's prophet, but he's on the run. He's fleeing. Have you ever been on the run? You're scared, somebody's chasing you, you don't want to get caught. Elijah's running for his life, and he's heading south from an event that he's just witnessed, and he doesn't stop until he's traveled 80 miles. And here he shows up under a juniper tree, completely spent, and he doesn't want to live anymore. He's gone from a mountaintop experience, and now he's going to go into a desert cave, and he's going to go into hiding. I'd better tell you what's gone on in this prophet's life. The Mount Carmel experience has just ended. Ahab the king, he leaves the scene, and he makes his way back to his palace in Jezreel. When he gets there, his wife Jezebel is waiting for him. Well, all day long she's been pacing the palace corridors, wondering, waiting, word from him. I wonder how things are going. Finally, her husband Ahab shows up. She was all full of excitement, wondering how the matters had turned out at Mount Carmel. She saw the rain clouds. She heard the distant thunder. She welcomed the victory in her heart that the god Baal was the winner, and all their pleadings had been answered, and the 3-year drought was finally over. She couldn't wait for that royal celebration in the palace that night, and they were going to have a feast like they've never had before. How did things go today? She smiled with pleasure as she greeted her husband Ahab. I have nothing. I repeat, I have nothing to tell you that's going to put a smile on your face. Why? What happened? Her face turns to a frown, and the two of them sit down. The worst has happened today, said Ahab. What do you mean the worst? Where are my priests? You're never going to see them again. Never see them again? What are you talking about? Explain it to me. They're all dead. All of them. Their bodies were dumped into the Mediterranean. They're now floating out to sea. Who would dare do such a thing? Didn't they defend themselves? Didn't you step in? How come you're alive? Where's Elijah in all this? Why isn't there a national revolt? You're still the king, aren't you? Then Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how the fire fell, and it licked up the altar, and how he had slain all the prophets of Baal. Hearing the massacre of those prophets, Jezebel, she turns into a ferocious mother grizzly bear who had just lost her cub. She went into a rage. Everybody in the whole palace could hear her screaming. She was now going to strike back. Now it's my turn, she said. Watch what I'm going to do. The thunderstorm was about to hit. She didn't care. Welcome rain was on those parched fields after that long famine. She didn't care. All she could think about was the blood of Elijah. And she's going after it. And she's going to slay him. So that very night, amid the violent storm, she sent this message to Elijah with this threat. The gods are going to get you for this, and I'll get even with you, and by this time tomorrow, you're going to be as dead as all my prophets. 1 Kings 19, verse 3. Well, who is this fellow Elijah that you're talking about? Well, he emerges on the scene several generations after King David has died. And then after King David, king after king after king arose, reigned, and did what was evil in the sight of God. And what made them evil? Well, there are two things. One, they ignored the plight of their people. And two, they bowed down to the idols instead of to Yahweh. They didn't worship the holy God. One after another, evil and corruption took place. At the end of that long list, we come to this king called Ahab. And he's described as the worst. His wife Jezebel, she's the worst of them all. When things got untenable, God called Elijah to lead his people back to himself. One day, Elijah challenges the fertility god Baal. And he's going to ask him to have a fight. And they're going to fight to the death. And it was Elijah against 450 false prophets. Whichever prophet called down the fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice, he would be the representative of the true God. Last class, you heard the result. Remember, a pillar of fire strikes from heaven? The sacrifice is consumed. We have a victor. We have a champion. Elijah wins. Elijah eliminates all those false prophets by putting them to death. Evil is destroyed. The nation of Israel begins again comes into a brand new clean slate. Queen Jezebel hears of the death of the prophets, and she puts out a hit list for Elijah. He's going to pay for this with his life. And before the day's out, he's going to be killed. What does Elijah do? He runs for his life. He runs away. He thought evil was destroyed. It wasn't. Elijah hightails it 80 miles south. And he finds himself in a desert, and he's going to be there for 40 days. But God's going to find him again, and he's going to find him in a cave. Elijah had thrown in the towel. All his air was let out of his tires. And there he was. He felt defeated by Jezebel's letter. And he felt depressed, a bit deflated, and now despondent, depressed. God finds him in that cave and he asks, Elijah, what are you doing here? Here was Elijah's answer. I have been very zealous for my God, for you, Lord, for the Israelites, all my people, but they've forsaken your covenant. And along comes Baal, and they've thrown down all your altars, and they've killed all your prophets with the sword. And I'm all alone now. That's it. That's all that's left. And they're seeking my life, and they're going to get it when they find me. They're going to take it away. Do you know what he's talking about here? Well, we've all been there. All of us have a cave to hide in. God says to him, watch this. Come to the mouth of the cave. I'm going to pass by. I want you to take a look at me. So he does. Elijah comes to the mouth of the cave, and now comes God. He comes in a pillar of fire, just like the one that he called down from heaven in those days before on Mount Carmel. But God wasn't in the fire when he passed by. Then there was a wind, a strong wind, so powerful that it split the rocks. But God wasn't in the wind either. Then came an earthquake. The whole cave shook and the walls fell. But God wasn't in the earthquake either. Well, then came the sound of a still small voice. It was God's voice. And he spoke in the stillness. And at the mouth of the cave, Elijah experienced the power of God. For him, it was as if he were looking through the James Webb telescope. And he was looking at what God had created, billions of galaxies and trillions of stars and planets. Finally, Elijah, waiting for God to answer, gets his answer. And he gets it in dramatic fashion. He's changed. He experiences and he connects with the power of God. And God puts his spirit in Elijah. Now notice what God does. And what he did for Elijah, he'll do for you. At the mouth of the cave, God asks him again, "What are you doing here?" Elijah says his sorrowful answer, "I'm all alone. Life is pointless." God tells him, "You're not alone. Out there are villages filled with scores of faithful people. I want you to learn a lesson, Elijah. In your self-pity, you don't see what I see. You think that you're the only one left. Well, I want you to think again. I've been working in others just like I've been working in you, and they're doing good work for me. You crawled into this cave to hide. I have some wonderful things for you to do for me yet again. You can't see them, but I want you to trust me. I want you, Elijah, to go back to work. You get out there. Now I want you to meet these faithful people that I've been telling you about. And I want you to lead them. And I want you to also train your replacement. His name is Elisha. You're going to be his leading apprentice. Like you, he will make things right. And he's going to pass, I want you to pass your mantle of courage and prophetic leadership. I want you to pass it on to him. Let me give you a wonderful lesson from Mother Nature. Do you know the story of the pearl? Unlike most precious jewels, pearls are not minerals. They're living creatures. Gems, they come from stones that you find in the mountains or down in the mines of the earth, gold, silver, opals, diamonds. Pearls aren't like that. They come from the ocean, and they're found in the shells of oysters, especially warm water, like the Mediterranean or the Persian Gulf or the Indian Ocean. These people living there in ancient history, do you know they regarded pearls as the most precious diamond of the day? As a matter of fact, the Roman author Pliny, he called the pearl the most sovereign commodity in the whole world. Well, Jesus saw their value. He compared the pearl to people. He told his followers, "Don't cast your pearls before swine, where they are trodden under feet." Jesus also said the kingdom of heaven is like a pearl that has so much value. I want you to sell all that you've got, liquidate all your stocks and possessions, and I want you to invest your fortune into the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven was like a pearl. Well, if pearls are found in the shells of oysters, how do they get there? Biologists tell us it's the result of damage that's been suffered by the oyster. And if the shell of the oyster is broken, or some tiny parasite bores a hole into the shell, and some grains of salt or some marine worm penetrates inside, do you know what the oyster does to protect itself? It secretes and shoots a powerful liquid to plug that gulf and that gap. It can even imprison that foreign body by smothering it all over with its magic glue. That secreted matter, it rapidly solidifies. And you know what it becomes? A pearl. But only damage is done. Or rather, the pearl only grows when damage is done. Does the shellfish, does it produce a specimen called the pearl? Only if there's been damage done before. Pearls are the product of that suffering. And if an oyster lives a quiet life, it produces no pearls. Only when it defends itself from that attack does it produce one of the world's most precious gems. The deeper the suffering, the larger the pearl. In the gem trade, the largest pearls are called paragons. Paragons are only created by the worst damage to the oyster. Ladies, when you wear your sparkling pearl earrings or elegant pearl necklace, I want you to think of that wretched suffering of that small shellfish down there in the bottom of the sea. Did you notice the connection? Without the damage endured by the shellfish, the necks and ears of wealthy women couldn't be adorned by pearls. Those pearls demonstrate the wonderful link between suffering and real wealth. In that cave, completely defeated, Elijah is about to give up. He's suffering, but his shell as a prophet has been damaged. God's Spirit is going to cover that damage with love and grace. And when the damage was done, a beautiful pearl became and emerged. In the book of Revelation, John described something in the life of Jesus that I think is quite important. John describes 12 gates in the New Jerusalem, and the 12 gates are called pearls. Each one is enormous. He goes on to say that the city has pure gold and it has walls of jasper, but the gates are massive pearls. The entrance to eternal life for all of us is through that pearl gate. And those gates weren't resulting only in the suffering of the shellfish. It wasn't that made them. Those eternal pearls were the suffering of Christ. He became our oyster. He opened the wall and the world for all of us. It's called eternal life. And those precious pearls were made through his infinite agony on the cross. When those nails penetrated his hands and the spear pierced his side, it produced an oyster full of God's eternal love. I call that the paragon pearl in the gateway of heaven for every one of us, both men and women. The door to heaven is a great pearl gate of love. What am I saying? The suffering of the oyster, the repelling of that invader in the dark depths of the tropical ocean, creating the pearl, is a beautiful picture of the symbol of the suffering of our Lord. There on the cross, building an entrance into the kingdom of heaven. And that magnificent achievement is born out of eternal suffering. God was teaching Elijah in that cave through his suffering. Don't resent what's happening to you, Elijah. You are becoming, through this, my pearl. Are you in pain? Are you suffering? What pearl does God want to create in you? What tribulation of yours is God going to use to benefit others? When you face and endure suffering, lasting value is going to be given to others too, through you. You're the pearl that others are going to wear and enjoy. In my class that I teach every Sunday here at our church, in that classroom are a number of pearls. They don't know it, but that room is really my jewelry store. I have in that class an orphan. She grew up in England. She had no mother or dad. That little girl was totally abandoned. She came to Canada and she found a husband who became her oyster, and she became his pearl. And together they served the Lord in Africa as missionaries all their lives. Never once did I ever hear that lady complain that she had been an orphan and she didn't count. She had suffered rejection, terrible loss as a child. But when she grew forth, she became a pearl, and she became an example to all those people she served overseas. In that class, I also have a widow. She's got 4 kids. When that last one was just a baby in arms, her husband died. This lady had never finished high school. Now what is she going to do? She's got 4 mouths to feed, no income. A friend of hers got her a job with one of the large oil companies downtown. In that oil company, she worked and she worked and she continued to work, and she worked very hard, and she rose to the top of her department. It wasn't long before she became the boss over 50 other workers. She hired and fired. She read the resumes of new employees. Every new recruit was certainly better qualified than she was. They didn't know it. All her skills as a single mom, however, were translated into managerial excellence. And that gal, she became a pearl and then a paragon in her company. And now she's retired. All 4 of her kids are grown up. And you know what? They become pearls just like she was. Finally, I have a retired farm boy who was told by his dad when he left the farm, "You're not going to make it. And you're not going to make anything of your life." He struggled in school. Classroom learning left scars. But that boy loved electric currents. He got a job wiring houses. He was accepted at trade school. He graduated with a ticket in electricity at the top of his class. He went from there to become a master electrician. He married a Christian woman whose gifts were accounting and management, and together they formed and founded an electrical company in our town, and it grew to become one of the biggest and the best electrical companies in the entire city. And one of their clients was a school board, over 300 schools they served. Well, he's retired, but that company is going through his sons because they're now running the business. They have a fleet of trucks and employees. They number in the 60s and 70s. His dad told him, "You're not going to make it." That farm boy was wounded. He was damaged. It didn't stop him. Those scars became an oyster and a pearl. And that pearl is now a paragon. And that young man, and now that old man, in business as well as in this church, he's an example that all of us can follow. I want you to get ready. I want you to think of yourself as somebody that's been damaged and somebody that's been hurt, just like Elijah was and just like these ones I've told you. I think I'm talking to a new pearl in the making. That's you. When you come back next week, I'm going to show you a picture that I have got hanging in my office. And it's got a beautiful story. And I think if you come, you're going to enjoy it just like me and why I put it on that wall. Till then, thanks for coming today.